Hi again. Recently in my YouTube feed there was a video of Steve Cattle discussing, analysing and performing Hangetsu Kata. And I was reminded of the depth of knowledge that Steve had regarding the history, the application and the meaning of kata. And I was delighted to watch this exposition he did. I'll put a link to it. And it got me thinking about Steve and what his legacy was. So in this video, which acts as a tribute to his memory, I'd just like to talk about the Steve Cattle I knew. In the Red Triangle in the 60s, I came out of the dressing room. I was already changed into my gi and I was doing some stretching, warming up, when this chap who I'd never seen before came out of the dressing room. And to my surprise, I noticed he was a brown belt, same grade as myself. And I didn't know him, so obviously he was a visitor, and I went over and spoke to him. And he explained that he was from York, and he'd been training for quite a while and had moved to Liverpool ostensibly to join the teacher training college just outside Prescott, the CF Mott, to pursue his career as a teacher. But his overriding decision was he wanted to train at the Red Triangle with an order sensei. And we actually hit it off really well and became friends. And Steve established a dojo at the teacher training college. It had really good facilities. It had a physical education stream, so the gym was good. And he started a class there on a Saturday. Now, the Red Triangle was open every day except Saturday, and I was training those 6 days. And so I took this opportunity to make it 7, and every Saturday I'd go up to CF Mott. It's not too far from where I live, to be fair, and we'd train. After a while, Steve, who was a black belt in Judo, went to Japan to compete in the World Student Olympics in Judo. And I couldn't wait for him to come back. He was the first of our circle to go to Japan. So when he came back after several weeks, I eagerly collared him and we sat down and he told me of the experiences. First of all, he travelled overland by rail, including the Trans-Siberian Express. And I always chuckled with the idea of going into Lime Street Station and asking for a return to Tokyo. But his description of this journey made my decision years later to fly an easy one. There's no way I wanted to experience the Soviet Union. Anyway, Steve entered the competition. Excuse me a second, I'm just reaching for something. He entered the competition and stayed on at the renowned Tenri University, where they had a very well established judo club. And several years later, Terry interviewed him for Fighting Arts, this issue of Fighting Arts, and I dug it out. He's actually on the cover there, and I will quote his experiences of training in Japan, because a lot of people remember this interview, and I've spoken to quite a few people about the comments he made about training in Japan. So I'll read the whole thing, because it probably you're not going to get hold of this magazine. It was 1967, by the way. And he was in Japan for 3 or 4 months. So he was training prior to the actual competition at Tenri. This was and still is definitely the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. Terry asks, how so? Well, the training was so severe it was ridiculous. I can honestly say I've never experienced anything like that, nor would I want to repeat. I believe it's not as bad now, the time of the interview many years later, but this was in the days of Matsumoto Sensei, who was All Japan coach. Now, he may well have been a very nice guy, but in his coaching of judo he was brutal. We would get up in the morning at 7 a.m. and run up and down a 2-kilometre hill, first on your own, and then you would have to piggyback a partner of your own weight halfway up, then sprint down. The trainers would beat you with shinai, the bamboo sticks, if they thought you were slacking. Then hundreds of push-ups, back raises, sit-ups, etc. Then repetitive uchikomi. That's the judo entering preparation movements for the throw, but without actually throwing your partner. After this you were dead. It was unbelievable. Then you had a cold shower. You had to have a cold shower. It's supposed to be good for your spirit. Then it was breakfast of cold rice, fish seeds, pickles and the like. All the popular breakfast dishes. I remember I never used to chew most of it. I just put a piece of dubious origin in my mouth and swallow it. That's the only way I could get it down. You could have a little sleep then. You really couldn't do anything else even if you wanted to. You were so tired. We had to be down at the dojo for 9:45 and warm up. There would be around 200 black belts practicing in the dojo, which was absolutely massive. The gong would go at 10 a.m. and the instructors would file in, about 7 or 8 of them. After bowing to them, everyone just made 2 lines and did randori, which is free practice, for the next 2 hours. It was in the summer, and you can imagine what the temperature was like. After the first 10 minutes, none of us foreigners could stand up. The Japanese would just keep on throwing you over and over and over again. They really took a delight in smashing you. The gong went again at 12 o'clock to end the practice. You then had another cold shower and your lunch. You had to be back in the dojo for 2:45 for warm-ups, and then an hour of newaza with groundwork between 3 and 4. That was even worse than the previous 2 hours of being thrown, because you'd often get strangled unconscious, and then when you tried to submit, when they had you, say, in an arm lock, they just wouldn't accept it. In the end, I used to kick, punch and bite them to make them let go. I had to, otherwise I would never have survived. Another thing I did, along with several other of the overseas judoka, and you can cut this out of the interview if you like, was wait for some of the nasty ones outside the dojo and get them on their way home. They were doing evil things to you during training, and of course with them being seniors you couldn't do anything about it in the dojo, but off the mat was a different matter, and I smashed quite a few of them in this way. Then they started to respect you more when they realised you were not prepared to just take it day after day, week after week. I mean, it won't be as hard now because the European judo men are much better than they were at that time. At 4 p.m. we then did circuit training. I just couldn't move for 5 days a week. On Saturday mornings we just had the hill running and randori for an hour. Then the rest of the day and all day Sunday was free. I was just totally exhausted all the time I was there in Japan. I can testify to how good Steve was at judo, and I'll mention something about that a little bit later. In 1966, the second All Britain Karate Championship was held. It was sponsored by what was then called the ABKA, All Britain Karate Association, and I think the first year, 65, had been all just Wado, but other styles entered in 66, and the other styles being us from the Red Triangle and the guys from Kyokushinkai in London. And we drove down in Steve's small car. There was Steve, there was Bobby Poynton, his brother Jimmy, myself and my girlfriend, all in this small car. We drove overnight. We competed all day on the Saturday, and then we drove back overnight. And we used to do things like that in those days without even thinking about it. No sleep involved at all. In 1972, we went to Denmark. This was something that Terry had been invited to put a team together for Kata Sensei, and it wasn't an official sort of it wasn't a Red Triangle team. He just he didn't really want to go himself, but he sort of was obliged to, and he sort of said to Gary, myself, and Steve, "Do you want to go?" And we all sort of thought, "Yeah, why not? You know, go to Denmark." Anyway, so we went on the train via Harwich, very long journey. And I put this in my book, this story. German trains have compartments, and the bench seats can push together to make a flat surface and you can sleep on them. Or it can be a dojo. And that's what we did. So we pushed the seats together and we would grapple. All of us had a grappling background to some extent. Terry had done judo and aiki. Gary had wrestled and done jiu-jitsu. Steve, of course, was a judo black belt, and I'd done a very little judo, but had done an awful lot of grappling training with Terry in the park in Manchester for literally for hours. So I used to enjoy doing it. So we would grapple. And the thing about grappling with Steve, and this is a very important point, and it kind of goes back to what he was saying about Tenry University. When he would put a lock on you, which he was very adept at, whether it was a wrist or it was more usually the elbow, it wasn't a submission. He didn't put it on and then expected you to tap. It was an offensive move. It was a joint attack. So you would go to grab him and he'd attack the elbow joint and your arm would be numb. And we'd say, "Hey, Steve," you know. But then thinking about it, that's exactly how those techniques should be taught and utilised. Okay, you shouldn't be injuring your training partners, but submissions are a sport concept. You know, in the street, you're not going to put a lock on somebody and expect him to tap. Okay, the idea is it's a damaging thing. It's kind of similar to if anyone ever saw the movie with Toshio Mifune, where he's a jiu-jitsu master and he dislocates people's arms when they attack him. So that was our journey, and one of the funny things was we pulled into a station not realizing, and people just saw people apparently fighting, and luckily the train left before the Polizei arrived. Don't really remember too much about the actual competition. Obviously we didn't win, but we spent about a week in Denmark on very, very little money, enjoying. We trained there at the dojo every day and did sightseeing, and then made our way back on the train. By this time we were broke, and they kept pushing this trolley with really delicious smelling coffee, proper coffee, and pastries or sandwiches, and we had no money. And Steve had this, I think it was 100 Belgian francs or some similar currency, which he brought with him, and he kept promising to change it. It was a bit like Billy Bunter's postal order, when I get my postal order, chaps, I'll pay you back. And we'd already asked the chap if they accepted this currency. He said no. Anyway, we were all starving, and next time he came round, we all ordered, have a coffee and, one of these rather delicious looking pastries, and we all took one and were nibbling it. And when he wanted payment, we all just said to Steve, there you go. The guy didn't like it, but then he didn't really have much of an option. He had to accept this money. So we got back to Liverpool, absolutely broke, to the point where my girlfriend worked in a shop in town, and I had to go to her and borrow bus fare for us all. We didn't even have that much. Anyway, that was an experience. Sometime later, Steve established a dojo. He had been training at the Red Triangle up till then, but he established his own dojo in Kirkdale, in the community centre. And in the 70s, we had a course with Chinan Sensei, one of the renowned Okinawan instructors who's resident in the United States, and he came over to the UK, and he came up to Liverpool, and we were looking for a place to use. It was a combined effort from a few Goju dojos, and Steve very kindly offered the use of his dojo for the weekend, and we went and trained, and it was arduous. Chinan Sensei was one of the hardest taskmasters there were. What he would do, he would give the lower grades, the brown belts and below, a rest for a few minutes, but the black belts had to continue, and then he'd get everyone up, but the black belts still obviously were doing the reps. So we suggested stopping for lunch. We were all starving, and Sensei didn't want to really, but we said, it's been arranged, which is, so if you say that to Japanese, they usually agree. If something's been arranged, it's impossible to change arrangements. So we shot up to Chinatown with him, and we tucked in. But he ate a little bit, and he kept saying, hurry up, I want to do push-ups. We finished our meal, we went back, and he started doing a type of push-up where his entire body, hands and feet and everything came off the floor, and he did that for 15 minutes while we sort of watched, thinking what's in store for us. So that was a really good thing. And Steve trained, Terry trained, two guys who are very open to influences from other systems. Steve was very close to Kanazawa Sensei and to Kasei Sensei, who was the senior instructor in Shotokan in Europe. He was one of the four who came originally 1965 together with Kanazawa Sensei, Anoda Sensei, and Shirai Sensei, and sort of lit the fuse for us all. Anyway, Kasei Sensei in particular, because of his background, he had trained with Master Funakoshi, and more significantly with his son Yoshitaka, who was reckoned to have been the best thing in karate in those days. He died shortly after the war. And also Kata had gone through the wartime training, which was very severe. They were preparing for the invasion, and they had this martial arts spirit infused. And you can imagine the sparring in the universities then. I mean, it's bad enough now. People sometimes die. Back then, it really was severe. So Kasai Sensei was a formidable instructor and exponent, and Steve was privy to a lot of really good information from him and from Kanazawa Sensei. I remember Kanazawa Sensei talking to us one day, to Steve and myself, and he said before his competition in Japan, when he won the title, he had researched some of the samurai methods of how to make eye contact, and also the breathing rhythm and your opponent's breathing cycle and so on. And he said it was very important stuff, and Steve lapped all this stuff up. And the video I mentioned where he's discussing that kata was obviously based on a lot of this type of knowledge. He was a very fierce competitor. There's a true story about Steve. He was injured and he was actually on crutches, and somewhere up by the cathedral 3 guys attempted to mug him, and he dealt with them to the point that the police were considering arresting him, even though he was on crutches. He was formidable, and he had a glittering competition career, including being national champion. He competed in sparring competition and also kata individual and team competitions. So he was a real all-rounder. And he was a member of the legendary Red Triangle team, which for many, many years was unbeaten and seemingly unbeatable. And you didn't just get a place on that team because you were popular. You fought for your place. And the 5 guys on the team were really the best of a large group of guys in that dojo who were all very competitive. Steve used basic techniques, oizuki and gaikuzuki. He would score with these predominantly hand techniques. These are the 2 techniques that really you learn right from the beginning. And because they are basic techniques, it doesn't mean that they're simple to use. They're quite difficult to apply because they're so well known and they're very direct. He would usually take the offensive, but he could play the counter game as well, just depending. But what he was very, very good at was the use of feints, the ability to discern openings, his footwork, his timing, and his use of distancing. And he had a real grasp of tactics, and he actually explained this in another article in Fighting Arts in a different issue, which was the most in-depth discussion of the tactics of karate competition that had been given at that time, and probably even since then. What a lot of people do naturally or just instinctively or just because of the intense repetitions, he was able to articulate why it works and how you can apply it in different circumstances and so on. And one of the things he did very well was play with time, not timing, which he was also adept at, but the time. When time was running out and he knew his opponent, if his opponent was, say, half a point down, he'd be more likely to initiate an attack, and Steve would anticipate this. A lot of his techniques involved a very courageous dashing in, generally against bigger opponents, and he took a lot of damage as a result of this, but he was very courageous, and as I say, it worked for him, and he had an illustrious career. This was epitomised in the final of the KOGB Championships one year, where he and Terry met in the final. Now, just to set the scene, Terry had cruised through the early rounds. One year, and I can't remember now if it was the same year, but I remember watching him go through 13 elimination rounds, all winning with Ippon, 1 point wins. And sometimes that was the first technique he attempted. He would just go up, throw one technique, the fight was over. So they met in the final. And Steve took Terry to 3 overtimes, which was unheard of. I don't think anyone had ever done it before or has done it since, to my knowledge. By many people's accounts, and myself included, he gave Terry his hardest fight in the arena. And to break the stalemate, finally, Terry had to pull a trick out the bag, and he did a rolling axe kick and managed to get the deciding point. But talking to Terry about it afterwards, you know, he was full of praise for Steve, and really it showed two very, very different physical types and very, very different technical types, both at their peak. So I hadn't seen Steve for quite a while, and I was down at training centre in Ipswich, where we used to use for the bodyguard course. There used to be HMS Ganges, amazing place, and I was down there to take part in a shotgun instructor course, what was then called practical shotgun or combat shotgun. And I'd gone down there, spent the weekend, and it was Sunday I was coming back. And I got on the train at Euston with the Sunday papers and with my shotgun in its case, put it on the overhead rack, anticipating a long and boring journey. We used to call it the Agatha Christie special on a Sunday evening going, and you more or less went overnight. It took forever. And lo and behold, who sits down opposite me? Steve. And it was one of the most pleasant train journeys I've ever had. We didn't start grappling or anything like that, because it wasn't laid out like a German train, but we talked and talked non-stop. One of the things we were talking about was the fact he was jealous of the fact that I was regularly teaching over in South Africa when he was teaching in some of the hellholes of Africa. And some of the stories he told me about the conditions and dead bodies in the streets and things like this, you know, it was it really was something to fuel the imagination. And as I say, it was a most enjoyable journey, and we caught up on old times and so on. Then that was in the early 90s, and then I'd say maybe 2 years later, I get a phone call from a mutual friend and telling me Steve had died. And the really poignant thing was he died on a train. He was in a compartment on his own. Steve suffered from epilepsy. He had a fit and his airway was blocked, and he choked to death. And really, obviously, tremendous blow to everyone who knew him and everyone in the martial arts community. Steve was a legend of British karate, as the title of this video suggests. He was a serious student, a talented instructor, and a fierce competitor. He was great company, always ready to share a joke. His legacy was having been a leading part of the generation that established British karate on the international stage. He had the heart of a Viking, and he left us too soon.